The story begins when we see an old man obliterating some dragons just by raising his hand. However, that same man thinks that is not good enough and that he must become stronger. On the other hand, we see Ragna, typical disgusting loser. He tries to fight a small dragon, but he's so weak that the dragon yanks him against the tree. Luckily, he has Leonica, a hunter prodigy, to protect his pathetic self. She blocks the attack and finishes the dragon in a single blow. She tries to give him some advice to get better and he simply thanks her. Turns out this strong girl has feelings for this pathetic trash and wants to be petted instead. Ragna then explains to us that dragons have a magical bloodline and only attack humanity. He reveals there are 2 ways to kill dragons. One is to freeze their blood with the aura of silver weapons, and the other is to let them burn in the sunlight. Literally, they're vampires. After finishing their quest, Ragna and Leonica decided to return to the guild and Ron Abra. While walking through the streets, everyone comments on how Leonica has a scar on her face and talks about her rumors. Turns out she already killed 50 dragons despite being a tiny girl. After entering the guild, Ragna explains that Leonica is the dragon hunter with the highest kill count in their city. Despite only being 12 years old, he's pretty sure she will become even stronger when she gets older, but despite being the most feared dragon hunter in the city, Leonica still behaves like a child, especially when it comes to food. Ragna takes a picture of her, thinking she's his hero. She's confused, but he replies that he's simply recording her growth. Suddenly, a guy calls Ragna out and mentions he's living off Leonica's hard work. Leonica doesn't know who this guy is, but he introduces himself as Sykes, the second strongest dragon hunter. Still, she has no idea who he is. The guy gets annoyed and picks on Ragna again. He mentions that his skills are below average, but he still managed to team up with Leonica. He insults Ragna, mentioning that he's dragging Leonica down and doesn't even deserve to carry her bags. He then mentions that Ragna is a cursed person, something that annoys Leonica. She threatens Sykes with her sword and asks what he is looking for with his blade. Does he want wealth, status, or glory? The guy is wetting his pants and Leonica explains that she only wants to become the strongest person in the world. She says that dragons are the strongest creatures alive, and for that reason she will hunt them all. She will even hunt the strongest one, the dragon god, just to prove to the world that she's the strongest person. She turns around and asks if the other dragon hunters want to join her. She promises to share everything with them, wealth, glory, or status. All they must do is go with her and defeat more dragons. But out of everyone, only Ragna raised his arm, promising to go with her. He says that he will accompany her until the end, which turns Leonica into her child self. Mentioning that she likes him, she feels a bit sleepy and the two decide to head back to their inn. Once they return, she immediately falls asleep while Ragna looks at her while smiling. He then uses this chance to head outside and practice his skills in secret. He reveals that he doesn't have any talent to become a dragon hunter. He's pretty sure he will be eaten by a dragon in the future, but he doesn't care about it because he simply wants to help Leonica become stronger. Suddenly, the image of the man we saw earlier appears behind Ragna and says that he won't be useful. Ragna gets startled and the man says that Ragna will lose Leonica. Ragna starts seeing some images of the city engulfed in flames. He's confused about what's going on until he suddenly feels like someone pushed him away. He then sees Leonica apologizing to him after being pierced into ground meat by a dragon. Ragna gets on his knees, shouting and crying in pain until he suddenly wakes up. He realizes it was all a dream, but the voice of the old man says that what he just saw will happen in the next few days. Ragna is still shocked by what happened, but he decides to buy some meat before heading back. He finds Leonica on the way, who asks him why he wanted to buy meat instead of eating at the guild hall like usual. He makes an excuse mentioning they lack vegetables. She puts on her child's attitude, mentioning she doesn't even like vegetables. He tells her that he will be cooking today, turning her back into her usual cute behavior. She happily walks away, mentioning she also wants him to cook for her for the following days. By night time, Ragna takes Leonica to bed and decides to head out to practice again. The next day the two return to the guild to pick up their mission, but Leonica doesn't find anything that interests her and they decide to go outside. She mentions that there have been very few dragons lately, but Ragna is still thinking about the dream. He then tells Leonica that her hair grew a bit, so he will cut it. They head back to the end, where Ragna cuts her hair just as he had promised earlier. Suddenly, he remembers her expression from his dream and freezes, but he returns to normal when she asks if he's done. Later at night, Ragna has the same dream again and wakes up in tears. He doesn't understand why he's dreaming about it, but it must mean something. Nevertheless, he keeps training in his free time, motivated by that sight, while taking a pause. The old man's voice shouts that Ragna will lose Leonica. That puts him in a state of rage, motivating him to train even harder. Meanwhile, in the guild the hunters discuss how the dragons have been behaving strangely for the past few days. They deduce the dragons are migrating in groups to the east, which explains their lack of quests. Sykes checks the map and realizes that the dragons are heading to the city of Donna Piero, a city the dragons haven't attacked in the past 10 years. He thinks that doesn't make sense, but the other explains that's the truth. Leonica, who is listening to the conversation, mentions there's a pastry shop in Donna Piero she wants to visit, and since the dragons are heading there, she thinks they should move to that city. Even so, Ragna is still thinking about his dream and wonders if it was just a dream. He thinks that it looks so real, plus the old man keeps appearing. He doesn't know if the old guy is a ghost or a vision, but he somehow feels real. Leonica tries to wake him up to reality and wonders what's happening. She asks if Sykes has been bothering him again and asks if he wants her to beat Sykes up. Ragnar replies that Sykes hasn't done anything. Leonica pulls Ragna's hair and mentions there are bags under his eyes. She then turns his hands around and says they're injured from training. She gets closer to him, mentioning that he's been working harder in the past few days when compared to his whole life. She asks him what happened and why he's doing so much in a short time. She asks him for the reason, but Ragna turns his weak new mode. He holds her hands and asks what he can do for her. He tells her that he doesn't feel like he can actually help her in a real way because all he can do is take care of things for her, some sort of parenting. Leonica smiles and asks if he remembers the time they met for the first time. Turns out at that time Ragna was being beaten up as usual by a bunch of bullies. Yet for some reason Leonica thought Ragna had the potential to have the same strength as her. Ragna is shocked because he thinks that's impossible because he doesn't have the same talent as her. She then replies he indeed doesn't have a talent for dragon hunting. However, her instincts tell her that he will become strong. However, she doesn't know when that will happen or the reason why he will become strong. Ragna's eyes open up listening to her words, yet she mentions that she cannot wait until he becomes strong. She then embraces him and mentions that she will protect him until that time comes. Ragnar then thinks about his past. His parents were eaten by dragons when he was 3 and some of his relatives took him in. Turns out that a week later they also were eaten by dragons. A wealthy family then adopted him a few months later and guess what? Dragon appeared and burned them down. This guy is cursed. In the end he became a homeless boy without a family because dragons cannot eat your family or burn your house if you don't have one. But people started to blame him for being the reason why dragons appeared. Sykes is one of the people who blamed him and the one who bullied him. They all accused Ragna of working with the dragons because everywhere he goes the dragons attack and for some reason, he's usually the only survivor. At that time, he always wondered if there was a place where he could live in peace, but then a bright light appeared in front of him. It was a young Leonica asking if he wanted to hunt dragons with her. She was an orphan homeless child at that time, yet she mentioned to be linked with dragons isn't a bad thing if he becomes a dragon hunter, especially if he always manages to survive without waiting for a reply. She welcomes him to her party. Ragna is confused and tries to refuse because he knows something bad will happen to her too, but she simply replies that his misfortunes aren't his fault. She simply explains that weak people die and only those stronger than dragons survive. She tells him to not worry because she's strong. She then extended her hand and Ragna saw hope in her, so he decided to take it. They went on a mission to defeat a dragon, but Ragna is your typical coward. He wanted to give up just by checking the dragon size. Yet Leonica rushed forward and sliced the dragon in half with one hit. She then turns around and says that she lived, making him realize that she is strong. He doesn't think she will die before him, so in the end he decides to go with her into his best to help her. Back to the present, Leonica asks if Ragna still thinks he's cursed, but he replies that he doesn't think so because she's with him. He then reveals his wish to stay by her side until a dragon turns him into barbecue. However, at night he has the same dream once again. He wakes up in tears and asks if what happened in the dream will happen soon. A few hours later, a report comes out to the guild. The dragons attacked the city of Donna Peru and burned it to the ground. Leonica wonders what happened and asks Sykes for information. He also doesn't know much. He only knows that a group of dragons attacked the city during sunset, but they haven't heard the news since then. However, the king already created a quest for dragon hunters to defeat the group of dragons that attacked the city. Sykes then tells her to ignore the mission because if she comes along, she will easily defeat them and get all the glory. He walks away and Leonica is confused because Sykes just gave her all the information she wanted. She wants to ask Ragna for his opinion, but he's frozen in shock. She asks what's going on, but he simply tells her they should run. Suddenly they heard a huge explosion outside. Everyone rushes out and finds the city in flames. Ragna is still shaken by everything and says they must run away. He's shaking in fear and tells Leonica they must run out of there, but she doesn't understand why. Ragna realizes this is the same image he saw in his dream and tries to say that she will die, but she simply holds her hand, telling him that she won't. She smiles and rushes out, telling him it's time to join the fun. Ragna is forced to chase her around the city. Civilians are trying to evacuate and don't understand what's going on. The dragons then reveal themselves and officially start their attack. The military tries to use weapons to take them down, but they are easily sent to Narnia. The dragon hunters trying to fight back but are still confused by what's going on. Suddenly the hunters see a man walking away from the flames, covered in blood, and tried to check on him. The man replies that blood is blades. The blood then turns into multiple blades that pierce the hunters. A huge pillar of fire appears around the guy and he is now dressed in a suit. Talk about style. The guy is somewhat of a dragon humanoid who respectfully tells everyone goodnight humans, you'll now perish. Meanwhile, Ragna is still trying to find Leonica until he spots something strange on a nearby street. He checks it out, turns out there's another dragon humanoid with tentacle blades coming from his back. Ragna then guesses the author watched Spider-Man or something. Without joking, Ragnar realizes that's the thing that sent Leonica to the afterlife. He starts to see the final images of Leonica once again and grasps his sword. He promises that no matter what, he won't let her die. Guess who's also there? Sykes, you guessed it. He's once again wetting his pants, wondering why the superior dragons are attacking the city. The guy freezes in place, accepting his demise, when suddenly Ragna jumps into the air and tries to slash the dragon dive from behind. He thinks that if he takes this guy out, Leonica will manage to survive. The only problem is that his sword breaks when he hits the dragon's head. The dragon smiles and says that blood is flames. This not only makes the fire and the city become more intense, but also creates another fireball that projects Ragna back into the river. Leonica, who watched everything, slices a dragon and tells Syke to jump down and save Ragna. He will be beaten up. He follows her request and heads out. She then jumps down from her tower and reveals her real personality. She's a Yender. She bursts in rage because this dragon die hurt her Ragna. She promises to kill him and prepares to engage. Meanwhile, Ragna is at the bottom of the pit. Literally and realistically, he never had swim classes and he's drowning down while sinking. In this state, his mind starts to recall even more events of his dream. After losing Leonica, he began a quest for revenge to hunt down every dragon until extinction. He sees how his mind becomes twisted. The more he fights, the stronger he becomes. In his dream, he trained his potential to the maximum, but that wasn't enough. He needed companions during battle who turned to be some random noobs because they always went to their afterlife. In the end, he was always alone and becoming stronger. He reached all his limits as if he was climbing a staircase, but that wasn't enough. He needed even more power. His new limits weren't like a staircase. It was so hard to surpass them that he needed to scale a cliff. He then hears the old man's voice, mentioning that if he looks back, his real desire was to find his last day, but always managed to survive no matter what. Ragna then sees himself in front of the old man and gets on his knees while tearing down. The old man then revealed who he was. He is Ragna from the future. Ragna cannot believe he's seeing his future self. The old man tells his younger self how disgusted he is. Ragna idolized Leonica as a hero and leeched off her, but if he truly cared about Leonica, he should have become the strongest in order to protect her. The old man yells at his younger self, explaining he's the strongest human in the world. Strong enough to defeat the dragon god, he now has the power to protect everyone who's dear to him, but they're already dead. He gets on his knees, regretting his whole life because he fought so hard to become strong, but in the end it didn't even matter. The old man starts to panic, wondering what's the point of being strong right now when he has nothing. He sounds like a maniac, until his younger self gets up and runs forward. The Ragna grabs the old man and asks for his power because the old man lost Leonica, but his current yourself self hasn't. We see that Leonica is still fighting the dragon humanoid and Sykes is doing his good action of the day by saving Ragna's body, but in his mind Ragna is fighting his older self, trying to convince him to give him his power because if he doesn't get that power, Ragna will lose Leonica again. He tears down and the old man pushes him away. The old version then takes out his sword and stabs his younger version's heart with it. The old man then explains this is what he was planning to do. Young Ragnar's body starts to freeze and the old man continues to talk. The old man asks if the younger self knows how remorseful he's been all his life. He always wished that his younger self would be as strong as his current old one. Suddenly Ragna starts to awaken his power and feels a huge pain in his heart and body. His body starts to twitch in pain while the old man states that from now on they will become one. he will have the power and memories of the future while being his younger self. He then says that he will give young Ragna all his power, but there's a huge price to pay, but his younger self didn't care because he needed to protect Leonica. Talking about her, she's completely exhausted from her fight, but the dragon guy seems relaxed. She asks if he's a dragon god, but the guy gets aggressive. He insults her, telling her to never compare him, a literal servant, to someone from the royal dragon bloodline. He attacks her with a fireball, but she dodges it. He introduces himself as Grumwort. The 10th seed of the blood of the wing must be a name for dragon generals or something. He then reveals that he's the weakest superior dragon, but he's still strong enough to squash the humans. Leonica couldn't care less and prepares to fight again, but he reveals that he wants to share something with her. He basically explains the reason this city and kingdom will be destroyed is because they will use humans as offerings to their gods. He then mentions that his god liked a pastry shop in Donna Piero and was one of their best clients. However, that shop was recently robbed and went out of business. He also reveals the reason why Donna Peru hasn't been attacked by dragons in the last 10 years is because they have been protecting it, and since the shop went out of business, the dragon god went into depression and decided to destroy the kingdom. Their feelings are also valid. Leonica is clearly as confused as we are with all of this, but yeah. In short, the dragon god decided to destroy the world because his favorite pastry shop went bankrupt. The guy then explains that his god decides the fate of everyone and asks if she saw him fight seriously. However, he never took her for real because dragon hunters don't pose a single threat to him. He then tells her to say goodbye and sends his blades against her body, just like it happened in the dream. However, in the same second, the dragon guy feels some similar blades are about to stab him from behind. He turns around, but it's dark. He thinks he saw an illusion, but the air changes and mist appears. The dragon guy senses something is coming, but he's unsure of what. He then suddenly hears some pieces of armor being dropped onto the floor, and when looking around he sees dragons frozen. Sykes also doesn't understand what's going on. Ragna then gets up and starts walking away, some dragons around him, but he's a bit lost in his old self memories. He remembers that he blindly pursued his goal to exterminate the dragon kind. The dragons try to attack him, but he defeats them just by touching them with his hand. He then remembers that he almost died countless times, but he still managed to survive. He quickly deals with the small dragons just by touching them. However, he starts remembering the times he lost and won the fights. He would initially lose every time until he gradually started to win every single battle. With those results in mind, Ragna starts to unleash his old version's real power. His old version then tells him that he fought against dragons for 10 years, and he realizes that his blade was starting to merge into his hand. He explains that never interfered with his dragon hunting. However, he felt a huge pain, not enough to stop him from fighting. 5 years later, the sword managed to completely fuse with his body, making him even more powerful. 3 years later, he created a technique to increase his body's silvering, which is the material the swords are made of, and the only material that can kill a dragon. After 4 more years, we learn how to control the silvering at his will. His old self then took 10 more years to surpass the limits of his human ability, which enabled him to master his ultimate battle technique, the silvering battle arts. He only did it with a purpose to give this power to his past self. The young Ragna unleashes this ultimate technique and defeats the dragons around with just his aura. And the split second, he quickly teleports in front of the dragon guy, and the dragon starts to freeze just by being next to him. The dragon recognizes that being near Ragna feels like being in front of the dragon monarchs. In short, the dragon monarchs were chosen by their god to lead the different dragon bloodlines. The most terrifying about them is that they also have an ultimate power. The guy enters his denial mode because Ragna should have this power. He breaks free from the ice and starts turning into his real dragon form. He mentions that he would never be afraid of a human like he is when he meets the dragon monarchs. As usual, this guy brags about his ultimate true form, might and power, but Ragna simply raises his hand and tells him to be frozen. In a split second, the dragon turns into a giant ice cube. Both Leonica and Sykes cannot believe how a weakling like Ragna has done it, but Ragna simply says to shatter, and every frozen dragon shatters into pieces. Ragna then retrieves his aura and returns to his normal self. He tries to catch his breath, but Leonica is calling for him. He looks back and sees her. The older and younger version of him combine their thoughts while they run toward her. The old version mentions again his regret for not having his current power in his younger self and how he wanted to see Leonica again. They start crying and Ragna hugs Leonica. He cries while calling her name, making her confused, but she smiles and pats his head, telling him that she managed to survive like she promised. She mentions his power and how hard he worked to achieve it. Ragna denies, explaining he didn't work for this power, but the person who did it isn't here anymore. However, he knows his old self story and how much he misses Leonica. Leonica, however, simply replies she understands and thanks him for saving her. Meanwhile, Ragna's old self meets someone. She asks if he died standing up and mentions that there was a price to be paid. She tells him that young Ragna won't manage to live long. However, she notices the old man's emotional look on his face, something she had never seen before. Yet she mentions they now must believe in the past, all because they hope their younger versions will create a world where dragons don't exist. However, on that same day, 6 other cities were attacked by a group of superior dragons. They exterminated everyone in sight and 6 cities fell except for one, where Ragna, the Reaper of the Dragon kind, was born. The next day Leonica explains the situation of the city to Ragna. However, Ragna is still talking about her staying alive. He then returns to normal and Sykes comes into the room. He asks about Ragna's plan. He explains they should leave the city because the dragons plan to destroy it. However, the dragons follow their laws. They cannot attack a kingdom or city their god didn't order, so Ragna says they must get out of the country because they won't be chased. Sykes then interrupts him, asking if he's the real Ragna. He explains that the Ragna he knows doesn't have talent, skills, or a brain, but his new version is pretty much the opposite. He asks who Ragna is, but our boy simply falls asleep. Sykes is confused about this timing, but Leonica explains to him that Ragna has always been training and secret. However, that training ended up draining and making him unstable. Ragna starts calling for Leonica's name in his sleep and tears down despite saying that she's there for him. Leonica wonders if Ragna will still need her with his new power. Suddenly, the ground starts shaking. They go outside and see the forest moving forward to attack them. Leonica rushes out to help, leaving Ragna alone in his sleep. That brings the episode to an end. The dragon now have the free will to attack humans, and we see a chef apologizing to a big guy named Lord Temroaktaf. The chef explains he prepared lamb baked in a pie crust. The Lord claims he has been tired of waiting and asks for the maid to bring his food. The maid is shocked and approaches the Lord. She's shaking, but that doesn't stop her from presenting the meal. The Lord laughs like a maniac and starts tasting the meal. The chef and maids are visibly worried, but they cannot leave the place. Upon tasting it, the Lord gives a big smile, mentioning it's delicious. He explains the combinations of flavors making the chef happy. However, the Lord explains it doesn't taste as good as the chef's. The chef gets scared and we see the Lord turning into a huge monster. A split second later, the monster devours while the maids watch in shock. They're caught by the big monster, leaving just one behind. The two are also devoured in a huge bite. The last maid watches in shock and she knows she cannot escape. The monster then turns to her, revealing that his god demanded humanity to be destroyed. Therefore, he has the permission to eat every human in that country. The monster then targets the girls, revealing his true monstrous form. The maid shouts in fear, but it's a bit too late. Meanwhile, back in the main city we see Sykes dashing through the streets. He slashes some sort of tree branches that he sees moving and notices the tree froze. He realizes a dragon is behind this. He remembers that dragons cannot attack during the day, but that's not what's happening right now. We then see Leonica cutting through some trees. She already defeated 10 of them, but it never seems to end. She then hears an explosion in a nearby street, but she focuses her attention on Ragna, as he has been restrained by some branches. She dashes forward to save him, but she's suddenly attacked by some branches. Sensing Leonica in danger, Ragna awakens from his sleep, calling her name and unleashing his power. His aura is so powerful that even the monster lord we saw before notices his presence. We then see that every tree branch in the air has been frozen by Ragna's power. He manages to stand still on top of a building, confused with what just happened. He then looks to the city and notices the forest too close to the city. He teleports away and runs to the location, but Leonica tries to chase him. He uses the buildings to leap away and increase his speed. Leonica ends up getting way behind, but Ragna is trying to understand how he fell asleep. He complains to himself that he felt so relieved to save Leonica that he let his guard down. He knows that the danger isn't over and he cannot forgive himself for what happened. He increases his speed until he encounters the monster from before. The monster tells him that's his private property, but Ragna ignores him and drop kicks him in the face. The monster ends up being projected away. The maid, who's still alive, is confused about what just happened, but Ragna stands still and explains his curse. If anyone gets close to him, they will be ended by dragons, especially because he saw the same happening in the future. He wonders how he can stop that from happening and realizes the only solution is to slay every dragon. He unleashes his killer aura and promises to exterminate every dragon with his own hands. However, he still has doubts that he can do it because his future self also failed. The maid then asks if he's okay and he finally comes back to reality. He asks her what she's doing there, but she doesn't know how to explain. He thinks she's there to find him, but she's confused. He ignores her response and claims that she saved him the time to find her. He then claims that he will slay every dragon and asks her to help him. He calls her Crimson, but the maid is confused. She says that he's confusing her with someone else because she is Eliza. Ragna says her full name before she can finish it and explains her life. Turns out the maid is a 14-year-old boy from a farming village. Her employer's house was attacked by a dragon and she went missing, but that's all a cover story she told him in the future. The maid claims she's confused because her name is Elise, not Eliza. Ragna aggressively says that she's Crimson, the dragon monarch. She's the first seed in a winged monarch. He reveals she is a former progenitor of the blood of the wing and a traitor to the dragons just because she tried to kill the dragon god. He then explains she linked the future in the present and transferred the power of his future self to his current version, and Crimson's goal is simply to wipe out every dragon, including herself. However, he doesn't know the reason why she wants that. He extends his hand and tells her to use him because he wants the same thing. He explains that their future selves couldn't complete the mission, but this time is different. Elise extends her hand but then slaps him on the face. Ragna's confused, but Elise starts crying because not only he called her a man but he also called her a dragon. Ragna is pretty confused, but Leonica arrives at this time. She says that Ragna is too fast and asks if he already dealt with the dragons. Suddenly the other monster appears, pretty annoyed by the dropkick. He claims to be the 8th seed of the dragons and attacks Ragna, promising to chomp him up. Ragna summons a strange ball and throws it into the monster's mouth. He then quickly dashes away with Leonica in his arms and the monster explodes from inside. We see Elise watching him and hiding, probably because she was lying a second ago. Ragna then lets Leonica down and she tells him that he got as strong as she said he would become. She reveals she didn't expect him to be so soon, but she predicted it. She claims it will be hard for her to catch up, but Ragna simply starts walking. She ignored her claims and asked her to take the townsfolk away and cross the border. She asks about him, but he says that he has to stay and take care of something. She refuses to because she wants to stay with him. He tries to persuade her to not stay because things will be dangerous. She claims they are dragon hunters, therefore they should already be used to it. She asks why he's trying to leave her behind. Ragna says they will just have to work separately for a short time, but she yells at him saying that he should do what she orders him to do. She then apologizes for yelling at him, but Ragna realizes this is the first time she lost her cool. He always saw Leonica as someone strong, calm, and who knows what's right, but he always forgot she was just a 12-year-old kid. He blames himself for being weak and pathetic because it forced her to be stronger than what she really needed to be. He then realizes that to accomplish his goal to protect her, he cannot be weak anymore. He calmly calls her name and asks if she remembers what she told him when they first met. She remembers her first words directed at him, and Ragna then says that she promised to save him. He tells her that he's happy to have met her, but they cannot be together anymore. Leonica starts to tear down because she doesn't want to be separated from him. Ragna then looks at her with his cold gaze and calls her weak, and for that reason she will die if they stay together. Leonica tears down but falls into a burst of rage and tries to slice his neck off. Yet Ragna stops her blade with just one finger and pushes her to the ground. He then simply says goodbye and disappears. Leonica wakes up a few hours later. Sykes is back. She's initially confused about why he's carrying her. He simply explains they left the country because that's their only way to survive. At least it was what Ragna told him to do. He asks what happened between the two, but Leonica doesn't answer. She simply starts to remember the time they spent together. She remembers that one time when she told him that she knew her dream after touching a sword. She then asked about his dream, but at that time Ragna told her that he simply wanted to be by her side. After that memory, Leonica starts crying, explaining she really tried hard to cut Ragna down. However, that only made her realize that Ragna had the ultimate strength she wanted to have. She knows that she won't be able to kill him, but she doesn't understand why he left her. Meanwhile, Ragna is watching. They walk away from afar when Elise appears. She asks if it's alright to leave Leonica, but he says he's fine. He turns around also crying, and explains that he can only be with people whom he doesn't care about it because they will all die. Elise claims she will return home, but Ragna still calls her Crimson. She says that she was a dragon, she would die the moment the sunlight hit her. Ragna dismisses it, explaining her dragon monarch powers are blocked. She can barely use any dragon strength, but her weaknesses are also gone. She ignores him and wishes him luck, all because she claims she's just a girl. Ragna bluntly says she can change her gender and age whenever she wants. She negates it and walks away. Ragna thinks how he can make her trust him. He then remembers Crimson's words from his future self, explaining that she wasn't going to trust him right away. Suddenly, Ragna gets in front of Elise and claims that he knows how to read and write. He then continues explaining everything he can do, especially because he had to do it for Leonica. Elise is clearly confused, but he keeps going. Elise asks him why the bloody brownie is he saying all this BS, but he simply continues explaining that everything he has done for Leonica he will do for Elise. For that reason they should team up and wipe out the dragons. Elise refuses again, but Ragna suddenly collapses. Elise is confused and checks on him. She notices such a high fever and asks if he's unconscious before extending her hand. We then see Ragna from the future easily defeating a dragon. Suddenly, Crimson appears explaining he's impressed that a human managed to become so powerful. Old Ragna asks who he is, and when Crimson introduces himself, Ragna kicks his upper body away, destroying it. Another made version of Crimson appears from behind old Ragna stating he wants to make a deal. He wants Ragna to join him so that they can slay all dragons, but old Ragna slices her head off. The real version of Crimson catches the head, explaining he can teach him how to use his real strength. Present Ragna then wakes up in front of a fireplace Elise made. Elise explains she couldn't leave behind the guy who saved her. Ragna is confused. He fell asleep and wonders if his body is still not used to his power. He asks Crimson what she does think about it, but Elise replies she's not Crimson. She asks if what the dragon said was true about destroying the kingdom. Ragna confirms and explains that's the reason they need to hunt all the dragons right now, but first he needs to slay the winged monarch that leads them. Elise asks if he's kidding, but Ragna simply claims their future selves managed to do it 20 years into the future, but this time they will do it even faster because they have already met. Elise turns away and thinks about how Ragna knows about his true self is Crimson. He wonders about the future selves Ragna keeps mentioning because nothing like this has ever happened before. Still, Crimson finds it pretty entertaining. He analyzed Ragna's body while he was asleep and found out about two things. First, his body is fused with a silver sword, and second, his potential is very high. Crimson starts looking like a psycho, thinking about how much he wants to test this new method of killing dragons. This thought is so amusing that he feels like he never felt so excited before. Elise turns to Ragna again, but he senses some dragons flying nearby. They notice the dragons are heading toward Leonica's group and Ragna picks Elise up. He starts running while carrying her on his arm and asks if Crimson has any orders. Elise is confused, but he claims that he will obey any of his orders. Crimson finds it interesting but simply tells him to obliterate the dragons. Ragna goes even faster and jumps into the air. He kicks one of the dragons down, which gets him the attention of the remaining ones. He then unleashes his aura, creating several blades around him. The dragons try to attack him one by one, but Ragna uses the blades to stab them and freeze them in place. Crimson picks one of the swords to analyze them. They're literally trashed here, but somehow they can freeze a dragon just a touch. He thinks it has enough power to kill superior dragons using it. Crimson considers Ragna's power is something that nobody should have it. Still, he considers that if he could control an army that uses these swords, he could do some real damage. Crimson then pukes down and snaps his fingers. The vomit pool attacks the dragons and starts combining. Ragna realizes Crimson had a slime in his stomach when he notices Crimson walking past him. Then Crimson decides to reveal his true form and tells the dragons to die. The slime dissolves the dragons and Crimson looks at Ragna. Crimson accepts to join forces with Ragna under one condition: he must drink a special poison that will only activate if he tries to betray him. Crimson continues the long explanation, but Ragna simply chugs it down. Crimson is confused and asks why he did so quickly. Ragnar replies that he needs to protect everything he's destined to lose, therefore he will exterminate all dragons to make sure it happens. Crimson then uses the dragon bones to create a huge throne and claims they will slay the dragon god and hunt every dragon. That brings the episode to an end. Things continue with the end of their deal. Ragnar promises Crimson that he will be the last dragon to be deleted. With those words, Crimson now feels ready to begin his plan. He wants to create a huge battle that will change the world's fate and exterminate dragons. They're suddenly interrupted by a voice. It's the slime that was inside Crimson's stomach. The slime then becomes a small child and complains about Ragna's behavior toward Crimson. Ragna is initially confused, but then replies long time no see, but slime becomes infuriated, mentioning this is their first conversation. The kid proclaims himself as Crimson's #1 servant, the evil slime. He tells Ragna to show him respect by calling him Mr. Slime. Ragna complies, but the slime wants him to be louder. Crimson then lands on the slime's head. Pretty pleased the two dummies are getting along, but Crimson wants to know more about the future. He simply replies, "We lost." Crimson already knows that, otherwise Ragna wouldn't know most of what he already told him. Crimson asks how many dragon monarchs they managed to wipe out. He then asks Ragna about the world magic, the Great Crusade, what happened to Ragna in the end. Ragna is confused by each of those questions, and Crimson mentions his trust is now getting lower. Ragna explains he has some vague memories, but he cannot freely recall them. Crimson is curious, and Ragna reveals he didn't remember him right away. The memory simply came to his mind when he saw Crimson's face. Crimson realizes that Ragna needs a specific trigger to remember everything. He thinks that's pretty convenient for Ragna, but not for him. Ragna gets worried that Crimson will distrust him, yet Crimson uses my personal quote, "The only person I trust is myself." Ragna asks Crimson to believe him, but he's questioned about his power. Crimson also wants to know if Ragna's power that was given by his future self is also a faint memory. Ragna replies that he doesn't need to worry about that because his power is in his body, not his mind. They then get into a truck and move forward. Meanwhile, there's a city being attacked by the dragon kind. One of the dragon monarchs has the ability to control wind and restrains girls in midair. He uses his wind abilities to make small cuts onto the humans' bodies to torture them. This guy is literally mad because he's talking to the wind. The guy reveals that he's a bit curious. Human lives have some meaning to him just because he's studying how the bodies can be cut several times, but the girls are still alive. He claims this is all the way to make the wind stronger and create a sense of unity. One of the girls begs for help, and the guy finds that idea interesting. He thinks it would be amazing if someone came to help them because this is pretty boring. Meanwhile, we see the people who manage to escape being protected by a group of hunters. The leader of the group tries to motivate his party, telling them they must stand firm. The group follows up, but they notice the normal civilians running away from the spot. In the end, they fell victim to the dragons in the area. This makes the leader question what they're doing. A huge dragon is roaring at them and he starts to lose hope. Suddenly a truck arrives at the location, pulls out a Tokyo drift, and Ragna jumps out. He quickly slashes 2 dragons and confronts the rest. The group leader could not believe his eyes after seeing Ragna, who quickly defeats everything. Crimson gets out of the truck mentioning he's interested in Ragna's silvering battle arts. He then claims that he wants to see some dragons being wiped out by those skills. Ragna promises he will do it, but Crimson interrupts him. Crimson explains Ragna won't be the one who will be using those skills. The ones who will be using it are other dragon hunters, and points out to the group of hunters and survivors. Ragna looks at them and sees the group leader trying to comfort a young kid. He tells the child that he will get her across the border and make sure she is safe. Crimson sees this as an opportunity and tells them to rest assured. Crimson then reveals they have haunted all the nearby dragons and introduces Ragna as the Reaper. Crimson tries to convince everyone that Ragna is a master dragon hunter who clapped many superior dragons. Of course, everyone including Ragna is confused by that statement. Crimson then introduces himself as Ragna's companion and a mage. Everyone becomes impressed. In truth, Crimson knows there is a skill in this world known as magic, but only a few numbers of humans can use it. Crimson's thoughts reveal most of the magic users are superior dragons, so Crimson thinks he can trick everyone because 99% of the people have never seen magic before. The group leader asks if the water thing that is eating the dragon is magic. Crimson replies yes, to spite me and you knowing that's a slime. One of the hunters then why the water thing could turn into a person. Crimson replies it's magic. The slime gets annoyed and tries to insult the guy, but Crimson is quick to react. He starts petting the slime, explaining it's a pet made of magic. Of course, everyone falls into this line despite hearing the slime talking. They even say that magic is so amazing. Crimson once again takes advantage of the situation. At this point, not sure if it's a character or my ex, he starts saying that magic is amazing and everyone repeats it after him. In short, he just brainwashed everyone and turned them into his puppets. The group leader approaches Crimson and introduces himself as Michael. He gets onto his knees and begs Crimson and Ragna to take down a powerful dragon. Crimson is interested and Michael continues. He explains they ran away from Tortier City when it was attacked by a massive tornado. Crimson quickly identifies the powerful dragon Michael wants to be put down. That's the third seat the Tempest cell disses Troa. He explains the disses likes to hide in the wind and says that he knows about it because he's a mage. Ragna gets angry and decides to walk away, but Crimson grabs his shoulder. He asks Ragna where he is going. Ragna replies he will hunt disses, but Crimson says he can't. Crimson then gives Ragna a small pat on the back, making him fall forward. Michael is confused what's going on. Crimson then asks if Ragna knows why he cannot get up, and since Ragna cannot reply, Crimson decides to explain. Ragna's power removed all limits on his mind, but his body is still the same. His body is completely sore because it cannot physically handle his current power. As a result, all his muscle fibers are damaged and he won't be able to move for 3 days. Ragna gets pissed off, but Crimson smiles like a villain and tells him to leave this to him. As you have guessed, Crimson has quite a plan to use the other people. He tries to explain the situation, saying that Ragna is a bit injured. Everyone gets worried and asks if Crimson can defeat the disses instead. Crimson refuses, as always. Even when they mention they will pay him, they even promise to give their weapons to him as payment. Crimson sees this as their way of saying they're giving up on dragon hunting, but he cannot have it, so he declines again. He asks why they're all concerned about Disses because they aren't in danger at the moment. They don't give him an answer. Crimson then explains they feel guilty about running away from Disses. He then explains that Disses' attack range is quite wide and he also moves quickly. Therefore they needed to run away quickly without thinking about the consequences, but they now feel guilty because they ignored everyone who asked for help. Michael then starts to recall those images in his mind, increasing his guilt even more. He starts to fall into despair and Crimson continues his brainwashing operation. Crimson claims that Michael only protected this last group because he didn't want to blame himself for not saving the others. Michael then falls onto his knees admitting that's true. He claims he couldn't do anything because he's just a weak hunter. He cannot even face a superior dragon. Crimson continues to manipulate Michael until the latter claims that he would protect everyone if he had Crimson or Ragna's power. Crimson was waiting for this answer. He presents Michael with a sword claiming that's the power he desires. With that sword he will be able to clap dragons. However, Crimson has no way to make sure he or the rest will survive. Michael accepts the sword, making Crimson quite hyped up. He takes them to the old city of Tortiere and stops in a destroyed building. There's only a door there, but Crimson uses a magic key to open it. The hunters step inside and cannot believe they're literally in America. It's a room full of guns and they don't have licenses, by the way. They're all confused, but Crimson says this is all magic. You guessed it, magic is amazing. The guys get some weapons impressed by them. Crimson explains they're way more powerful if compared to the ones they use in their country, but the most important part is the bullets. Turns out that Crimson is literally forcing our moodless Ragna to infuse his power into the bullets. The hunters practice their aim, making Crimson smile like a maniac. Ragna comments on that twisted smile, but Crimson asks if he's against it. Ragna explains he isn't because he knows Crimson will make sure the hunters can win, but Crimson knows Ragna is a bit upset. Ragna explains he cannot move, but more importantly, he doesn't want to be called Reaper or to become a spectacle. He reveals he doesn't want people to be around him because they will die. Crimson then recalls his words, mentioning he will only stay beside the people whose deaths won't hurt him or people who cannot die. He then accuses Ragna of abandoning Leonica. He tries to negate it, but Crimson explains that's how Leonica probably felt. He says that's not Crimson's business, but that only triggers the dragon. Crimson explains that Leonica is Ragna's motivation, but what will happen if Leonica gets wiped out? He then claims that Ragna will wipe out every dragon and he won't let him quit before that happens, and since they're working together, Crimson now thinks that Leonica is somewhat important to their mission. Ragna explains that he knows that keeping Leonica near him will allow him to protect her, but he's still afraid of losing her again in front of his eyes. Crimson comforts him and reveals that he now understands Ragna a bit more, and you know how twisted he is when he suggests Ragna to imprison Leonica. Crimson explains they can use her magic storage spaces, put Leonica inside in a coma state, therefore she will be safe while they wipe out the dragons. She won't disturb them, she won't be in danger, and he will be able to take care of her. Ragna tries to move his body to punch Crimson, but he's too slow. Crimson then gets up and mocks Ragna by kicking him. He asks Ragna what his problem is and why he doesn't listen to him. Ragna simply replies that Crimson is a real douche. Crimson claims that's his best quality and turns psycho. He explains that he always hated Ragna's attitude when he stated that he knew so much about Crimson. He says that Ragna doesn't know anything about him and kicks his face. He starts walking away, mentioning he will defeat Disses. He then also complains about Ragna always stating that he's cursed and puts a bullet inside her mouth. You know how it ended. He also tells Ragna to stop acting like a coward who blames everything on his curse. The slime who was scouting Disses' movements returns and gives a report. He changes form to reveal the state of the city and what Disses is doing to the girls. Crimson realizes that Visas was ordered to stand by in that town and is currently spending time. He thinks that the girls need to hold on as long as possible for his plan. However, he doesn't plan to tell the hunters or Ragna about the survivors. He wants to manipulate everyone. Crimson starts making his plan and reveals it to everyone. They get all hyped up and to depart. Minutes later, Disses is pretty confused because he wasn't expecting someone to appear. He tries to welcome them, but Crimson uses a megaphone to speak. He introduces the group as dragon hunters. He then talks about dragon bloodline and starts calling Disses pathetic loser. Disses is pretty annoyed and doesn't understand how a human would talk about something they don't know. He continues babbling to himself until his 1.5 brain cells start working again. He cannot forgive someone who insults the dragon bloodline, especially the dragon god. Meanwhile, Crimson is just driving away, calling him once again a pathetic loser. The story continues. The dragon hunter was sure that they had made appropriate preparations for the battle. He and his man had fearlessly fought to ensure victory, but doubt was beginning to creep in after seeing the huge tornado made by the dragon, though he wasn't so sure of their abilities as dragon hunters to bring down this particular dragon. With his last shred of sheer will and determination, he lets out a scream of resolve. He encourages his team not to lose their nerve as they make a tactical retreat. Those words of encouragement were all his team needed to strengthen their resolve. The dragon, on the other hand, was intently determined to put an end to the dragon hunters. He wasn't just about to let them get away with it. The tornado he summoned around him was there to make sure of that. Crimson noticed Dis's tornado was faster than their car's top speed, and that meant they couldn't just retreat carelessly. Dis noticed they were retreating towards the sun, which it didn't like one bit. Crimson knows that mere sunlight won't be able to overwhelm a superior dragon in optimal condition, especially not the third seat. She knows his regenerative abilities can counter the damage from the sun, but he will be damaged nonetheless. She orders the gunner to open fire. He immediately starts firing with the mounted machine gun on the truck. He fires silvering bullets at Dis's tornado, but they freeze over before reaching the dragon. He tells Crimson, which makes her remember a misconception amongst dragon hunters. Most think silvery and bullets freeze the blood of dragons, but it doesn't. Silvery and bullets freeze the magic in a dragon's blood, so when it comes in contact with anything controlled by magic it immediately freezes. Dis is wondering what is hitting his tornado. He thinks it's a silver bullet. He's impressed Crimson was able to procure such a high-quality weapon. She reads his mind, knowing he would think she bought a machine gun that fires silver bullets. But instead we see the machine gun uses lead bullets infused with Ragna's silvering magic. As the bullets continue to make impact on Dis's tornado, an ice column continues to generate. Dis is not sure what Crimson is planning. They keep driving away from the tornado, weaving and dodging to avoid debris being propelled by it. Dis is not bothered with the attacks on the tornado's surface because he has great control over it. Once again, Crimson reads his thoughts like a gifted psychic. She has something else up her sleeve. She gives her men the order and they start firing another set of bullets infused with Ragna's silvering magic. But these bullets have a greater impact on the tornado than the previous bullets. This impact destabilizes Dis's tornado. Crimson is delighted her plan is working. Though the attacks were not able to take down the tornado, it made him increase its power immensely. Dis is in complete disarray. He's quickly losing control of the tornado. One of the dragon hunters tells Crimson the tornado's speed has greatly increased, and she tells him it's all part of the plan. She tells them all to keep firing at the tornado. As they do, they generate more ice columns which destabilize the tornado even more. Dis is at his wit's end and is visibly enraged. He vows to make the humans pay for what they've done, especially the bounty hunters in front of him. As he gets angrier, the tornado's size increases, destroying all that surrounds it. Crimson smiles with delight knowing she has made him angry. Dis is beyond enraged now. He promises the bounty hunters they won't get away with their plan. At that point, his tornado is completely covered by a huge ice column. Suddenly it breaks open. Dis is shocked as he falls out of the middle of the now broken tornado. Coincidentally, it's dawn and the Blue Tempest is shocked to see the sun rising. Ragna infuses a wall with his silvering magic, which was what broke Dis's tornado completely. Silvering arm forms and grabs Dis out of the air. Then a silver arrow pierces through his back and his blood begins to freeze. Dis still has no idea what is happening around him. He tries to summon up his wind magic, but all he can manage is a gentle breeze. His heart is injured by the arrow, which stops the flow of his magic in despair and desperation. Dis tries to melt the arrow with his wind magic, but he's too weak. The 5 knights hold the arrow steady to make sure Dis doesn't escape. The effect of the arrow and the sun combines makes him combust. Just then, the ground where the arrow is planted was uprooted by some strange force. Then raised dirt tilts and both the knights and Dis fall off, breaking the silver arrow. Dis is free now. He is so enraged the bounty hunters can do such unspeakable things to him. He tries to remove the large silver arrow from his chest, and then the truck which the soldiers use to outrun him hits him out of the blues. He's knocked down with several parts of him scattered around. This feels like he is dreaming as the soldiers lay waste to him. Crimson acknowledges bringing him down was no mere feat. She tells Ragna if he had transformed into his dragon form, he would have been able to summon up to 8 tornadoes, which would have afforded her plans. She tells him Dis's own pride was his downfall. Once she was able to get in his head and provoke him to try to end her, which guaranteed her victory. The combination of sunlight, silvering, and negligence were major factors. This is her list of 3 things that can take down superior dragons. To capitalize on the dragon's weaknesses, she came up with sophisticated weapons. The addition of silvery and the terrain were in place to make sure she was able to bring down the dragon. She tells Ragna he should thank Disses for letting him demonstrate his true potential. Ragna remembers when Crimson was chosen for the dragon hunt and is vowed to be recognized as an esteemed dragon hunter. Ragna now considers Crimson one of the best dragon hunters. He thinks Crimson was totally unfazed by the battle they just fought. He thinks it was just Crimson's way to experiment with his abilities. He is impressed that Crimson knows everything about dragons. He is also impressed with Crimson's battle IQ. Crimson is delighted that the dragon is finally brought down. Ragna is in awe of how remarkable Crimson really is. He believes with Crimson by his side, they'll be able to bring all dragonkind to their knees. Ragna vows to hunt Crimson once all the dragons have been exterminated. After the battle, Crimson provides the knight with vehicles and weapons to escape the city. One of the knights isn't too happy about running away, but Crimson him it's no problem because they are about to depart. Crimson casts his spell to make the knights forget about him. With that, he turns his back to the knights, tells Ragna to come with him and disappears. One of the knights calls out to Ragna and thanks him for letting them get their vengeance. Ragna tells the knight it wasn't just him, that they contributed a good bit too. The knights age grateful for his compliment and they shake hands. They take it as a victory for all dragon hunters. The knights depart and Mr. Slime bids them farewell. Crimson performs a magician's first trick. He pulls out a radio from his hat. Out of the radio a male voice speaks saying it has an announcement from the less royal army. He announces a dragon attack at the city's border, telling the citizens to evacuate to the capital. He assures the citizens the capital is safe and tells those who can't evacuate themselves to wait for army rescue. He evacuating citizens don't look too happy to be going towards the capital. He asks the citizens not to go near the borders for any reason whatsoever. At this point, Crimson turns off the radio asking Ragna for his thoughts. He tells Crimson he thinks it's a trap. Crimson agrees with him saying the army was blocking the citizens' escape route. Ragna tells Crimson they better get into action. Crimson agrees, saying he needed a change in scenery for hunting. Slime looks eager to get into battle as well. They all agree to set off for the capital. The scene changes to 5 days earlier. A view of the castle comes into light. The king was shocked after he was told Donapiru was destroyed. He tries to find out which city invaded it, but his guard tells him it wasn't a city but dragons which destroyed Donapiru. The king is shocked once again. The guard tells the king a lightning storm ravaged the city when the sun went down, reducing it to ash. He tells the king almost all station guards were eliminated. He tells the king after the thunderstorm. The horde of dragons arrived at the city, cutting off all communication from it. The king orders the guard to form a unit composed of soldiers stationed at nearby cities and send them as aid to Donapiru. He also tells the guard to recruit dragon hunters, but he orders them not to attack any superior dragons whatever the circumstance may be. The guard obeys the king's order and walks off. The priest tells the king the guard's story reminds him of an incident that happened 20 years prior. He tells the king something similar happened when Garnus invaded Donapiru. He says a thunderstorm appeared which destroyed the Garnison army. He tells the king those dragons saved their army. The king had hoped the dragons staying in that area didn't enjoy fighting. He wonders what made the dragons suddenly attack the city. He reminds himself that the royal capital is protected by a magic barrier. He compares the strength of a single superior dragon to people and he doesn't like how it looks. Just then a feather floats past his face. He looks up to see a bird-like creature flying above him with thousands of feathers filling the air. The king doesn't feel at ease because everywhere is so quiet and no one else is moving. The creature descends and greets King Femudlace. She apologizes for descending unannounced. She tells him she's one of those God granted the title of monarch. She tells him she's the first seed of the Bloodwing called Ultimatia. The king gets up from his seat, surprised the angel winged dragon is standing in front of him. Ultimatia thinks her name is too grand for her. He asks her how she got past the barrier. She explains what she knows about the solar barrier, telling him it's still functional. She tells him though she's calm, she's doing her best to bear the heat. She tells him she can't stay too long because of that. The king is really surprised Ultimatia made an appearance before him because since the war between men and dragons began, she hadn't made an appearance once. Ultimatia assures him not to be afraid. She tells him though his officers are not moving they are unharmed. She tells him she just manipulated time and made the world stand still. She tells him she did it because she cannot be spotted in the royal capital since she is a dragon monarch. She tells him it's a measure she has to take since she had to see him urgently. The king asks her why she came to see him. She tells him she has come to apologize and the king is surprised by her answer. She presents him with a dragon head. She tells him she didn't want Donapiru attacked but that particular dragon destroyed the city swiftly for no given reason. She tells him the least she could do is punish the perpetrator and bring him before the king as evidence. She apologizes for lacking in her authority. The king is a bit perplexed. He is surprised she is so calm and compassionate. He can't believe she is actually a dragon. The king figures that since he can still move and the magical barrier is still up, he can launch an attack against Ultimacia. He immediately rules that out because he knows it can lead to an all-out war which will destroy his kingdom. He considers all things and accepts her apology. She thanks him for accepting her apology. She tells him she didn't want the people of Lys to be afraid of death, she just wanted them to disappear quietly. Now the king doesn't understand what she's saying. He tells her she's not making sense since she earlier said she didn't want to attack Donapiru. She tells him she didn't have any intention of attacking Donapiru, but the country must be destroyed nonetheless because God decreed it. She tells him she's been preparing secretly to wipe out the country all at once. She tells him chaos will be inevitable now that one country has been attacked. She also tells him people are bound to expatriate to other countries. She tells him she can't let that slide, so she ordered attacks on cities bordering the country. She tells him not a single soul will escape the country. The king tells her to call off her attack, but she tells him it's too late. He tells her her actions could lead to war with his country. She assures him it won't get to that because it would be a one-sided bloodbath. She apologizes to him for this. He asks her if he can negotiate, but she tells him he can't. She wants to ask him for something, but he cuts her off, telling her he has made up his mind. He activates his ring, which draws the power of the solar barrier, converting it into a weapon. He prepares to launch the attack against Ultimacia, but his priest suddenly moves and attacks him first. A dragon head is now where the priest's arm was. He tells the king he can't allow any harm to come to their monarch. Ultimacia thanks Nebulum for putting up a shield to protect her. The dragon head also asks for her appreciation, but she tells him she didn't give him an order to eliminate the king. The dragon head called Borgias tells her he didn't eliminate him fully but just dealt enough damage to immobilize him. He tells her she'll understand his technique when she gets older, but she tells him she doesn't like being so brutal. She turns back the hand to time to heal the king. She apologizes to him once he becomes conscious. He wonders how he is still alive after he was just unlived. She explains how she turned back time to restore his body. He asks her if she's a kind of god, but she tells him she's merely a servant of God. He asks her if it's God's wish for the country to perish. She tells him there is no way for them to escape because it's God's will. She tells him he can escape from fear and torment though. She asks for his cooperation in clapping as many people as possible without making them suffer. She tells him to lead his people since he's their king. She offers him her hand and he takes it. The story continues. We see that the Femut army is evacuating all citizens because of a large-scale dragon attack in progress at a city near the border. The king is told that the number of refugees coming to the capital is getting out of control, but we can see that there's definitely something wrong with the king as he looks like he has the world's worst hangover. The king looks like he's riding from the inside out, as he simply says to just let all the refugees in and to stop worrying about the future. The head that Ultimacia kept on her sword like a lollipop is somehow still alive. Speaking about the king, he says that no matter how prideful or capable someone is, they will still look soulless after they're dead as their spirit is gone. Ultimacia arrives, surprised to see that he hasn't burned to a crisp yet, so she decides to update him on the situation. Their incredibly evil plan is already in motion, and in 10 days they will be able to give all of the people gathered in the capital a tranquil death, just like the psycho Ultimacia always wanted. She punishes the lollipop for interrupting her and reveals that they have a big problem. The 9th seed of the dragons was defeated by Starlia Lys, the second princess of the kingdom, so she sent 2 other seeded dragons after her. Aside from that, 3 other seeded dragons have disappeared, and we see that it's the 3 dragons that Ragna ended. An elder told her that they were defeated by an entirely unknown threat, but the body of this monster just as excited by this information. Ultimacia ruthlessly punishes him again since his rash actions are what cause his head to be removed from his body. She gives him back his heart as he promises to stop messing around, and she explains that his punishment is only temporarily suspended. She commands him to take care of this unknown threat, and we learn that this dangerous-looking guy is the second seat, the Lightning Claw Voltakamwi. This crazy dude wants a kiss as a reward if he is successful, but Ultimacia isn't having any of it. He tells her that there is no need for him to rush since he is so fast, and he instantly takes off like lightning. Then we see what happened in Ragna's future. He explains that he got in this terrible situation after chasing the blood of the wing and he lost. Ragna is surrounded by all the seeded dragons in the blood of the wing, and he is furious at himself for once again surviving without being able to accomplish anything. All the other humans have perished, so the dragons take turns sharing their opinions about what they should do with Ragna. Of course, these guys are absolutely evil, so they all want to end his life, and the only dispute is how to do it. Some of these bloodthirsty dragons want to eat him and others want to use him in their experiments. There are a few that don't care and one who strangely wants to end him with the least pain possible. Ragna keeps falling deeper into his internal rage, as all his enemies are standing right in front of him, but he can no longer move his body. In this future, Leonica died, and he wishes he had been the one to have died instead. Ragna condemns his own weakness, but realizes that this time even his life won't be spared. He is tired of all the anger, of all the enduring he has done, and wonders if he can finally find peace now that they are going to take his life. Unfortunately for him, Voltakamui can tell that Ragna is feeling relieved by the thought of dying, so the evil guy determines that they shouldn't kill him. He's an absolute psychopath, as he just wants Ragna to have to exist in his own living nightmare. Some others disagree, but the second seat points out that they show mercy to no one. Voltakamui asks if anyone has an issue with it, and Ultimacia makes her opinion known by destroying this guy. She reminds everyone how much she hates people who disrupt harmony and tells Voltakamui to shut up. Ultimacia asks that everyone take her opinion into consideration and shockingly reveals that she wants to welcome Ragna into their bloodline. Voltakamui's disagreement is met with a blade through his head, and Ultimacia introduces herself to Ragna as a progenitor of the blood of the wing. She notices that his sword is similar to ones used by dragon hunters in a certain kingdom. She thought it was an absolutely beautiful country, but she inevitably burned it to the ground. Ultimacia thought that she wiped out every living creature from that country, but realizes now that Ragna is the lone survivor. He somehow also managed to stay alive just now, so she determines that it must be God's will that he continues to live. This crazy lunatic is super happy that he survived, and some long-haired elf-looking guy explains what Ultimate is trying to say. Welcoming him into the bloodline means she wants to turn him into a dragon. It is explained that inferior dragons are mere beasts born from the blood of superior dragons. Superior dragons like themselves are the ones that are able to take human form. They were all given blood by their progenitor and used to be humans. Ragna is shocked by everything, and he is told that he should rejoice since he is being bestowed the gift of evolving into a life form far above humans. Ragna refuses as he is filled with rage and points out that they ended the lives of so many people he cared about, especially Leonica. Ragna angrily tells them to take his life, but the others point out that once he becomes a dragon, all his hatred will fade away. Ultimacia explains that she wants to save him from his living nightmare and prepares to thrust her blade of blood into his heart to begin the transformation. He begs her to stop, but she encourages him not to worry. Ragna will still be himself, and only his way of seeing the world will change. She plunges the sword into him, and the horrifyingly painful transformation starts. Ultimacia whispers that of all the things she can do for him, this is her ultimate atonement. Back to the present, Ragna wakes up and Crimson asks if he has remembered anything useful. Ragna ignores her to think about how Crimson is an absolute dirty scumbag, but he still prefers her overall Ultimacia. At least Crimson is very straightforward with how much of a jerk she is. Whereas Ultimacia X-ray kind and tenderly, all while committing mass murder on a ridiculous scale. Ragna hates Ultimacia with every fiber of his being, as he vows to hunt her again. Crimson is doing some thinking of her own and wonders what price Ragna would be willing to pay for using the full extent of his power, which is still unknown at this point. Crimson would rather wait a few years and thoroughly prepare before attempting to fight Ultimacia. Unfortunately, she knows that the blood of the wing is well aware of their missing comrades. She is certain that they will let Voltakamui loose, and that's terrible for them since he is their strongest fighter. All this being the case, she determines that the time to launch an ambush and Ultimacia is now. Crimson has a plan in case Ragna loses, and explains that he is an irreplaceable tool of hers. They arrive at the capital, and we learn that Crimson hopes to be able to speak with the progenitor. We then see that Ultimacia speaks to her god, who's practically a baby, and she confirms that this god wants everything unless destroyed. The kid doesn't even know what less is, so Ultimacia determines that it's because this doesn't even exist anymore in the mind of her god. That means it must be obliterated, and as their god's limbs, the dragons will carry out their god's will. This chick clearly has a few screws loose as she mourns the deaths of her fellow seated dragons and explains to them that they were simply unfit to be in their bloodline. They were not suited to be the limbs of their god, but she hopes that the destruction of less can be an offering to them. Ragna's group arrives in a busy part of the city, and Crimson explains that they will have to make their way through the second castle to enter the old district. She wants them to call her Veronica for now, but Ragna isn't listening, as he is too busy reintroducing himself to his breakfast. There are way too many people there, and Ragna gets sick and crowds. Crimson points out that the city he lived in before was pretty big too, so Ragna realizes that he was only okay because Leonica was always with him. Crimson wonders if they should call off the hunt because of it, but our boy has scary determination. He explains that no matter how sick he feels, even if his limbs are ripped from his body, if Ultimacia ever gets in his line of sight, he will end her life. Crimson decides that she can show him just a tiny bit of care and tells him to think of her as Leonica's replacement, but he says she could never replace his most cherished friend. Crimson tells him to go in himself, and Ragna has a reunion party with what was left in his stomach. They eventually make it to the old district, and Crimson leaves Slime with Ragna so she can make preparations. She reminds Ragna to stay where people won't see him and not to say the enemy's name aloud. Crimson gives them a bunch more rules, and Regina summarizes it as just not standing out and shutting up. Crimson leaves and notices that there really are a lot of people around. Something isn't right though, since the influx of evacuees to the capital should have already surpassed 2 million and the city should be flooded with people. This can only mean that the dragons are maliciously reducing the number of people without anyone noticing, like a stomach digesting the food that's been eaten. A massacre of the entire population is coming. In the castle we see that she is right. As Nebulum finished up his executions for the day, he explains to the armed dragon Borgias that Ultimacia wanted to see the condition of the evacuees for herself. Borgias is shocked to hear that she went out into public and scolds Nebulum for not stopping her, as it's their duty as mature dragons to protect the progenitor from her own impulsive behavior. Borgias has no time to listen to apologies, so Nebulum just tells him where she is, and we see that she has disguised herself with blue hair and glasses. Elsewhere, we see that the Lieutenant General is taking care of important business and is interrupted by Crimson. Seconds later, this dude is on his knees begging that Crimson warn him about her visits from now on, and he pretends it's so that he can properly welcome her. Crimson punishes the sleazeball and reminds him that she ordered him to gather intelligence by impersonating a high-ranking army officer. His real name is Golem, and he explained that he did do his job. She commands a girl named Chimera come out as well and tells the cat thing that she will be having Ragna face off with Ultimacia. This is incredibly shocking, so she explains that everyone will have to cooperate if they want any chance of winning. Elsewhere, Ragna and Slime go to see what people are gathering for. The removal of a tarp reveals several frozen dead dragons. The citizens are told that their city is during an unprecedented level of dragon attacks. This dude gives an inspiring speech as the dragons are burned up by the sun, and he reveals that their army demolished hundreds of dragons. He assures them that they will exterminate every last dragon that dare to bring harm to the kingdom, and the crowd erupts in cheers. The little slime thinks the humans are getting a bit ahead of themselves and points out that he could swallow the entire crowd whole in under 60 seconds. Ragna decides to leave but isn't absolutely stunned as a girl in a hoodie walks by him. His mind races back to one final thing Crimson told him before she left. She said that if by any chance he ran into Ultimacia, under no circumstance is he to attempt to fight her alone, as in that moment the hunt will surely end. Despite the impossible odds, Ragna has found himself in that exact situation. Ultimacia just walked by him and rage overwhelms every inch of his body. Even more shockingly, Ultimacia, not knowing who he is yet, returns to check if he is okay, and Ragna struggles to contain his fury. That brings the episode to an end. Thanks for watching. Want next part? Subscribe the channel and turn on notification bell.